Dies Marieve and Fáilte go LTV. You're welcome to the latest in our series of A Story That Should Be Told. And just before the introduction, the picture you saw there was a picture of Table Lodge, an addiction treatment centre, which will certainly feature in the story that we are telling today. In recent years, much publicity has been given to the negative and bad things within the Catholic Church. And this is in itself a good thing, and I certainly would not be critical of it, but it certainly has left an imbalance because the good things are not mentioned. And so the good deeds of thousands of people who devoted their entire lives is not mentioned and it's not reported. And this is the motivation for this series of programs on LTV. This series, titled A Story That Should Be Told, is trying to restore that balance. And that's the motivation behind this program and in the other programs in this series. Now today, in this program, it is my pleasure and honour to welcome someone who has devoted almost all of her adult life and utilised all of her gifts and talents in the service of others. It is a service that is freely given, that is voluntary, that is without any personal monetary gain, and is inspired and based on her Catholic faith. She was born in the homely community of Ballydaly, County Cork. She has been a nurse, a tutor, a founder of an addiction treatment centre with which she is still involved. She is currently caring for priests who have retired from the missions. She travels to parishes and other venues to give lectures. Sister Margaret Kiely, I am pleased that you are here with us today to discuss with us and tell us the story of your life of Christian giving in this episode of A Story That Should Be Told. You're very welcome.
Thank you, Con.
Now, I suppose the most notable achievement of your life was your work in establishing the now well-known Table Lodge Addiction Treatment Centre in Ballydaly in County Cork. But before we discuss that achievement, I think it's important that we start at the beginning in the homely, neighbourly, caring community of Ballydaly. So would you begin your story by telling us a little bit about Ballydaly, the lovely place in which you were born?
Thank you, Con. You have it nicely described there, I think, a homely, neighbourly community. I was born in a farming community, the eldest of 6 children. The neighbours were friendly and caring, and there was great give and take. I suppose the main event of the week was the Sunday Mass. That's where people met. We had no other form of communication. There was no television. Few people had a telephone. Then there was the annual event of the Mill Street Carnival, where local communities got together and enjoyed it. And everything about that era, I suppose, was very simple, very simple.
And it was a farming community you were born into, and that
Yes,
meant, of
yeah.
course, that you were kept busy and made sure you didn't get up to any devilment because
Without a doubt,
you
yes.
had to do some jobs around the farm.
Yes, yes. Being the eldest of 6 children, we all had our jobs before we went to school. We milked cows. After school, we pulped turnips. We saved hay in the hay saving time. We did the corn. We helped with the corn. We picked potatoes. We drew water from the well. So everything was simple and I suppose manual at the time. There were no cars, no tractors, and everything was done by hand. But I think it didn't do us any harm. We became multitaskers. I think we could fit any job after that.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And I think as well, you mentioned earlier that it was very neighbourly, and in the sense that I suppose at times of thrashings and in the bog, etc., and saving the hay.
Yes,
The
yes.
neighbours helped together.
Yes, it was the era of the mehel.
The
You know,
era
where
of the
people
Mahal.
came
Yes.
together and they helped each other out. And we, of course, we all looked forward to the threshing.
Yes.
And when it came to saving the turf, we were all called upon as well to do the bog or to take tea down to the men.
Yes.
And that was always, it was a chore, if you like, but it had to be done. But we, as children, you know, we fitted into all the jobs.
Very
And I think
good.
it helped us for life later on. You know, after that, I trained as a nurse, and you know, hard work was no stranger to me. I trained at the South Infirmary at a time when the students were the main workforce in the South Infirmary at the time. We got a half day in the week, or if we were on night duty, we got a night off in the week. And the students were, as I said, were the main workforce. We got a lot of responsibility, and
What kind of pay would you get now for all that hard work in those times? This was as a trainee nurse now at that time.
Yes, I'm glad you asked me that. No, because we got £1 and 1 shilling per month.
Per month.
Per month, £1 and 1 shilling.
Yes.
We depended a lot on our families for subsidy, if you like, or for the cost of the fare home. We had to get some money from home.
Yes, and
Yeah.
were you kept within the hospital?
Oh yes, we were kept
Yes.
within the hospital. Yeah, we lived in the nurse's home.
Oh, okay.
Yes, yeah.
Now, the type of work you did many tasks beside just nursing in its purest form. Did you have to dress the beds and that
Oh
sort
yes,
of thing?
oh yes. There was no such thing as care assistants at that time.
Yes.
The student nurses did all the work. Whatever it was cleaning or caring or making the beds, as you say. But there was very little technology at that time, of course. So it was again,
Okay.
things were very simple.
Okay, now you
Yeah.
mentioned having had to milk 1 or 2 cows before you went to school. Now I think there was a quota of beds that you had to have ready as well before 8 o'clock in the
Oh
morning.
yes,
Is that
yes,
right?
yes. When we were on nights, working on night duty in the South Infirmary, we had 24 patients in each ward, and we had to have all their beds made before 8 o'clock in the morning.
Before
8 o'clock, yeah.
in the morning.
Yeah.
Okay, now eventually then something was niggling at you in your mind through those years, probably before that as well. Sometimes it's referred to as a vocation, but you referred to it earlier as a call.
Yes.
Will you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, I think it is a call. I suppose I prayed a lot about it, and I felt the call was there even when I left school, before I went nursing. I felt the Lord was calling me to a religious life. But I kind of put it aside, and I did my nurse training first. And when I finished my training, I felt the call was still there, so I had to listen. So eventually, I decided to join the Mercy Sisters. They at the time were managing the South Infirmary, so I joined in St Mary's of the Isle, the Mercy
Yes.
Sisters St Mary's of the Isle, where I did my novitiate there. After
How long was that?
That was about 2.5 years. After that, then I was assigned to the Mercy Hospital, where I spent the next 25 years. So Sister De Pazzi was our matron there at the Mercy at the time, and she was a great woman in her own day. She was, I suppose, she made sure that we were able to work in all departments, day and night. So I was assigned to various wards there. Then I spent time in the laboratory and in the nurse's home, in the kitchen, in the dining room, in the pharmacy, in the theatre, everything. So at the end of a few years, I could fit in anywhere.
Yes, you had developed a wide range of skills.
Yes,
Can I
yes.
just come back briefly to the vocation again? You, I suppose, as many people do, they tend to put it off, and but you said it just kept niggling at you; it wouldn't go away.
Yes.
Now, during your novitiate, of the 2.5 years, did you ever have any major doubts about being in the right
Yeah.
place?
No, mind you, I always felt I was in the right place once I got to St Mary's of the Isle and met other novices who were there as well. A number of them at that time were there from the Philippines, and because the Mercies were setting up a foundation in the Philippines, and a number of girls came from the Philippines to do their novitiate in Cork. So we were all there together, and we were kind of multicultural, if you like, as at that time even. But no, I never had any regrets, thank God.
Okay.
No.
And I think you mentioned to me earlier as well in relation to the connectiveness between your life in Ballydaly and the neighbours and the givingness of your dad and your mum, but what desire was in yourself to work as a nurse?
Yeah, I suppose what I wanted to do is to give my life to God, really,
Yes.
in the service of the sick.
Yes.
In the service of the sick. And I also felt I'd like to go on the missions, but I was never assigned to the missions.
Okay.
I had the opportunity on 2 occasions, maybe one of going to Liberia and the other of going to Kenya, but I never actually worked there for any length of time, except for a few weeks.
Okay.
I was, it was from the African missions in more recent times. I accompanied a man an archbishop who had a stroke and who was treated in Cork. I accompanied him out to Liberia.
Yes.
And I had the pleasure of meeting the president of Liberia who came to visit him. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was her name. She's the current president of Liberia. So that was an opportunity I would never have had except in the Mercy Order.
Okay. Was that recent?
That was about 7 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, just to come back again to the vocation and your novitiate and your life as a nun. It's a particular type of life, of course, very different from maybe the life that other people live, but it has to be sustained by prayer. Yeah. And we discussed that earlier. Would you just outline briefly the prayer structure that you had as a nun in your early years?
Yes. Well, I suppose it has changed a lot, but in our earlier years we had, and we still have a lot of it, morning prayer, midday prayer, evening prayer and night prayer.
Yes.
This is the prayer of the church now. Vespers would say part of it, and then we had Compline. Yeah. Yes. Then we had Rosary and Benediction, and of course daily Mass. A lot of that we still have, but in more recent times now, our prayer has changed a bit in that we have very much we see nature as very much part of our prayer now. Okay. It's the interconnectedness of all of life, and like bringing nature into our prayer. And seeing, we'll say, the animals and the birds and the flowers and everything as part of life and part of prayer.
And God, I think as a teacher that often occurred to me was I often wondered where children in particular get the idea that they can't do something, or the belief with which they become convinced and they say, I can't do that. Now clearly, Sister De Pazio wouldn't agree with that because she got you to do everything.
Yes.
And it was expected that you could do it.
Yes, yes. And I think in religious life we have great opportunities. You know, we're asked to do something and we see that as God's will for us. Yes. And then we have the support of the group, and of course there's always financial support as well. If we're setting up something, we can be guaranteed that the community will fund it for us, you know.
Yes.
But I suppose, you know, I have done things in religious life that I would not normally have done.
I wouldn't have had the opportunity.
Yeah. Yes, I wouldn't have had the opportunity, exactly.
Now, in relation to funding, you, as a nurse, would have been earning a wage, and you didn't get any of that yourself, of course. What happened to the cheque when it came?
Yeah, well, we got a cheque from, as I say, we were paid by the government when we worked at the Mercy Hospital.
As a nurse?
As a nurse, yeah. But we signed the back of the cheque and it went into the building up the hospital, into, you know, putting up new buildings and new extensions at the time.
The that they earned was to sign the cheque on the back, and then the money went into the order in the hospital for funding in the hospital, for building it up and ensuring that there would be a good service available to serve the people. So Sister Margaret, all in all, spent 25 years of her life as a nurse in the Mercy Hospital, and after that her life took a turn and that got you involved in something else. But before I actually come to that, you were also a tutor. In other words, you trained other nurses during your time in the Mercy.
Yes.
And then you were asked to do something which to me was an extraordinary thing to be asked to do. Namely, you were asked to set up an addiction treatment centre. And this was there popular or common enough nowadays, I suppose. But at this time, they were very rare. So, how did you feel about being asked to do that, and how did you manage to deal with it?
Well, I was very happy at the Mercy and very settled at the Mercy Hospital. I was teaching nurses for about 14 years and I loved the job, you know.
Yes.
But we had a chapter, a Mercy chapter, where we look at the needs of the day. And one of the things that came up at that time was the need to set up a treatment centre for people with alcohol or drug problems.
Right.
Another need of that day was to do something for the elderly, and that was looked after as well. But I was asked then to set up a treatment centre in what was then our holiday house down, it was St Mary's Convent in Ballydaly, which is now Tabor Lodge. But I thought a lot about it, I prayed a lot about it, and people were, my friends were rather negative about it, saying there's no need for it, it's too far away, it's about 15 miles from the city, you know, so it's too far away, or what are you going to do there at night with drunks and that, and everything about it was negative. Even the Bishop of Cork at the time, Bishop Murphy, said there wasn't any need for it. But anyway, eventually I got a place for training at the Hazelton Centre in Minnesota.
Okay,
and
can I just stop you there,
yes.
because I remember in our preparation you telling me about that, and naturally you were a little bit nervous about this task, and probably very nervous arriving in Minnesota, strange place, etc. And there were 3 signs there that you saw that meant that it was as if they were telling you, this is God here, you're in the right place, these are the signs to prove it. Will you tell us what signs there were?
Well, the 3 signs I had, well, when I went out there, I saw the treatment centre was called the Cork Centre, C-O-R-K. I couldn't believe it, but they told me it was called after Croc MacDonald, who donated the funding for it.
Okay.
The second sign, I was in a group of 20, all recovering addicts. They were all the trainees. And I was assigned to a unit called Dia Lynn, which they said it came from the Irish folklore.
Indeed,
that when a person sneezed, they thought they were being possessed by an evil spirit, and they said, God with us.
Yes.
So that was my unit or my ward. And the third thing was, when I looked for the local church, it was called St. Bridget's. So there were 3 things. I said, I'm in the right place. And I felt the training was wonderful. It was, you know, there was great respect and for patients. They were treated with great dignity and respect. And the only thing, I suppose the hardest thing there was the weather, because we had frost and snow 6 months of the year. But apart from that, I got on well there and I enjoyed it. All my class of 20 were recovering either addicts, or drug addicts, or gamblers, or food addicts, or whatever. I thought at the time, well, I'm not an addict at all. Now, I have nothing to recover from. But when I told my story out there, they told me I was recovering from religious life. I'm sure my my religious life was very foreign to them.
Okay.
So they told me I was in recovery from the religious life.
So it was an addiction.
At the time, I didn't believe it, but I think afterwards I began to accept it.
Okay. Okay. Now, then it was time to come home and do the difficult part. Tabor Lodge, how did you get the name for that?
Well, we were thinking about a name for it, and I suppose in the treatment centre in America, what I saw was the change that took place in people in treatment. Men and women came in and they were very dishevelled, I suppose, initially, and they were detoxed, and then the men began to iron their shirts and groom themselves, and the ladies were putting on their makeup and wearing their jewellery, and there was a total transformation. And I said, I want some kind of a name that would bring in transformation. And I thought Transfiguration was the best I could come up with. And that was Mount Tabor, where the Transfiguration took place. Jesus took with him Peter, James and John, and they went up a mountain to pray, and there he was transfigured. And he showed them himself, I feel like he showed them God. This is my son, the beloved. God, you know, in a cloud, he was made known to them as God. And I think people experienced God as well in the treatment centre. So the two things, so I said Tabor is the word I want, so we called it Tabor Lodge.
Excellent. And that was that Mount Tabor, was that the name of the mountain where Jesus was
Yeah,
transfigured?
yes.
Okay, and the transformation of people from being dishevelled,
Yes.
unkempt, etc., to
Yes.
being neat,
Yeah.
tidy once again.
Yes.
I can see how that meant it was very appropriate, and I suppose it was part of your mission statement to
Yes.
achieve that transformation
Yes,
or transfiguration with the patients or
Exactly.
the residents of Table Lodge.
Exactly.
Excellent. Now, how did it develop, or was it slow at the beginning, or did you have difficulties, or
Yes.
did you have a sense of almost this is going to fail at any time?
Yes, yeah. Well, I suppose the biggest thing was really the lack of support. You come from a hospital where you've all the structures and all the supports, and you go out into the community where you've no support, you've nobody to turn to for help. We'd no funding. We were funded by the Mercy Order for the first 6 months, but through lobbying the health board and that, we eventually got some funding from the health board, and we also then got some funding from the Drugs Task Force, which was set up for drugs in particular, the treatment of drug addicts in particular. And then the probation services came on board, and we got some funding from them. Then we got recognition from the VHI for a small number, 3 or 4 beds, which everything together helped us with regard to the funding. And we went from having 1 patient on day 1 to having 3 patients after a month, and then gradually the numbers built up.
Okay.
And after about 6 months then or so, we saw, or about 6 years or so, we saw the need for halfway houses, for more extended care for young people who were on drugs. So
can I just ask you, because I wouldn't be familiar, and maybe some of the viewers might not be familiar with, what is a halfway house?
Yeah, well, a halfway house would be between, it's kind of half work, it's residential, and it is half work and half treatment. Now, in nowadays, they tend to call them extended care, and they're mainly for young people, whereas the treatment in Tabor was just for 1 month, and 1 month was not enough for young people who have been using drugs and alcohol for a few years. So they go into the halfway houses for 3 months, and they go to a FOSS program in the mornings. They're paid by FOSS, so they have an income, and then they have their program in the afternoons, and then they go out to meetings at night. If they're AA, they go to AA, or Narcotics Anonymous, or Overeaters Anonymous, or Gamblers Anonymous, depending on what their addiction is. And it's really helping them to put into practice the programme they've learned in Tabor Lodge. In Tabor Lodge, yeah.
Now, just to clarify again, were these halfway houses within the campus in Ballydaly, or were they elsewhere?
Oh no, they were in the city. They had to be in the city, really. For the women now it's up in Shanakeel in Blarney Road, and for the men it's in Spur Hill. And there are plans now to put up a new extension, a new building in Spur Hill, because they have been allocated 4.5 million by the government to build a new halfway house up there, and they'll have accommodation for about 30 residents between the halfway house itself and some extended residential care for them as well, so that when they move on they'll have suitable accommodation there as well.
Okay. Now, you mentioned a treatment programme lasting a month in Tabor Lodge, and that, as I learned from you earlier, is based on the 12 steps of the Aaa Fellowship.
Yeah.
And I think you narrowed them down a little bit for me earlier on. Yeah,
there are 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they were set up, I think they'll be 70 years now next year. They were set up in America. They're very simple steps. They're spiritual. It's a spiritual program. They've been applied to all sorts of addictions now, not just alcohol, but gambling and food and sex and anything, any kind of an addiction, even depression. But we can apply it to our own lives too. I'll say that there in a minute. But the 12-step program, step 1 says, I'm powerless over alcohol and my life is unmanageable. And people must admit that in treatment. And step 2 is coming to believe that there's a power greater than themselves that can help them. And step 3 is being willing to change. So making it simple, I can't, God can if I let him.
Okay.
Another way of saying it, we must name the problem, claim the problem as my own, name it, claim it, and tame it. You know, by naming it and owning it, it kind of becomes less of a big deal, if you like. But the 12 steps can also be applied like to other issues in life. Like, for example, I had breast cancer there a few years ago, and I was able to say, step 1, I'm powerless over breast cancer. And my life can become unmanageable, or I can do something about it. So, practicing the program, I can talk about it, share about it, and makes it easier in doing that. It helps me to share it. It helps the other person to hear it even too, because other people may have the same problem. But it's like the 12 steps are great in that they can be applied in that way.
Yeah, and possibly even to other areas or problems as well.
Yeah.
I was interested to hear you say that there are so many different types of addiction. You mentioned alcohol is probably the one we think of the most, obviously,
Yeah.
or drug addiction, etc.
Yes,
but there
yeah.
are other ones. Gambling, clearly a severe enough one. And you also mentioned to me in our earlier talks that these can lead to can have terrible effects on families.
Oh, yes, yes. We say for each addict, there are at least 4 members of a family affected,
Yes.
4 other people affected. And you could almost say that the family are addicted to the addict. The 12-step program is applied to the family member as well. Like, I'm powerless over the addict, and my life is become unmanageable because of my total obsession with the addict. The addict is obsessed with the drugs or the alcohol, but the family is obsessed with the addict. And their lives can become unmanageable. So the 12 steps are applied there as well.
Okay.
So,
Can I ask you, and because I've heard sometimes that alcoholics or maybe people with addiction, that the kind of attitude of people at home, they think they're helping them, but actually that they're doing maybe not help, but that they're a hindrance. And by that I mean that sometimes it's facilitated, their behaviour is facilitated by maybe the parent or the spouse, who will ring up Monday and say John is sick, he has a very bad flu, tonsillitis, when John has a very severe hangover, and this happens again and again, and that in that way maybe they're facilitating it.
Exactly.
Does that happen?
it does, oh yeah. We call that enabling.
Yes.
It's, if you like, it's enabling the person to keep using or to keep drinking.
I see.
But there's a family program in Tabor which is very well attended, and it's while the person is in treatment, the family come down for their separate program,
Oh.
and they're helped to see how their behaviour is enabling the drinking to carry on, or the drugging or the gambling. Because very often what you'll find is family members paying debts for gamblers,
Okay.
we'll say,
Yes.
or as you said, they're making excuses at work for
Yes.
people who can't go to work, or just covering up in every area. So what they learn to do is to stand back and
Okay.
allow the person who is addicted to take responsibility.
Okay.
It's all really about taking responsibility for themselves. So the family member has to learn to say, look at themselves, this is what I'm doing, this is my behaviour, I'm going to change.
Okay.
So if one person in the family decides to change and others follow suit, then that also helps the addict to change.
Okay.
And sometimes in Tabor, I'd have found we would sometimes invite a family to come to the family programme if they wanted help. And later on, the person who was addicted would come. And I would say, maybe, why did you come at this time? And they'd say, oh, my wife went down there to the family programme and she got very independent.
I see.
And, you know, she
I
laid
see.
off, and then
Okay.
that enabled the addict to come.
Okay. Then you have an approach in Tabor of abstinence, but there are other approaches maybe that are there of necessity, I suppose, depending on the degree of the addiction and
Yes.
the degree of the type of drug as well to which people are addicted, and that's called, is it maintenance
There's
approach?
methadone maintenance. You hear that very much in relation to heroin addicts.
Okay.
You see, the heroin is injected, and is a lot of dangers and consequences going with that, whereas they give the oral methadone then, which is less harmful. But we would see that as still continuing the drug.
Yes.
You know, it isn't abstinence. Our program would be abstinence and lifestyle changes. Abstinence and lifestyle changes. That's the main focus of our program. Other programs might be harm reduction, trying to, allow the person to use, but teach them how to use in a way that would prevent themselves harming themselves.
Okay.
But again, I suppose we stick to the abstinence and lifestyle changes
As being the best.
as being the best. And it's great to see a person abstaining and then making the necessary lifestyle changes.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a move at the moment within Ireland and pressure is building up to legalise cannabis. What are your views on that?
No, I wouldn't agree with that at all. I know there are moves to legalise it, but in my experience of cannabis, it leaves people very immature and very open to using other drugs. It's kind of a gateway drug. I'd call it a gateway drug. And there's also, it also takes away a person's motivation, whether it's to get better or to study or to work. It's called the amotivational syndrome, and that's where I'd see cannabis as a dangerous drug in a way. Whereas it's used socially a lot, but I would say in all my experience that it's a gateway drug.
Okay. So by gateway you mean it's a stepping stone onto the next
other drugs,
and harder type
whether
drugs.
it's onto alcohol or tranquilizers or cocaine or ecstasy or whatever.
Is it correct to say that cannabis can have long-term effects? Say somebody now might be using cannabis age 13, 14 or 15, but that the mental consequences don't appear until 27 or 28. Am I right in that?
Well, I would say that for young people using cannabis or any kind of drugs, or alcohol is a drug as well, at a young age, it delays their maturity. See, the brain is maturing up to the age of 25, and you have young people using alcohol, getting drunk, becoming addicted at a young age. They do not mature. They remain very immature. That's my experience of people coming into treatment maybe in their 20s, and they're acting like they're 14 or 15-year-olds.
Very good. Now, another type of house you mentioned was, I think, sober houses, and I think you said this difficulty arose because when people left treatment and left maybe the halfway houses to get accommodation, then that was safe. Very often they found themselves in accommodation where there were people involved with alcohol or maybe even with drugs, and the pressure to fall back again or to relapse was very high. Is that what the sober houses are intended to overcome?
That's right, yeah. We found that when people were leaving the halfway house, they were finding accommodation, all right, but it wasn't suitable accommodation. They were going in with people who were drinking or using, or maybe going back to their own environment or to their own places where they came from, back to the same friends. So the whole idea is to keep them away from the friends for as long as possible. And sometimes even the homes were not suitable. Like if you have somebody, an active addict in the home, well, that's not suitable for somebody trying to recover. So they go into the sober houses then for about 6 months or so, on the condition that they remain sober. You see, and that those houses are supervised as well. They may not be a staff there every day, but somebody does a spot check maybe once a week. But again, it's all on trust. You try to trust them to be responsible and to practice their program and to stay sober.
That's great. Now, religious life. You mentioned in our chat earlier that in your earlier days, childhood days, perhaps in the earlier days as a novice for the Mercy Sisters, your view of God was somebody who was judgmental. What did you mean by that?
Yes, I suppose in that era, say 50 years ago now, we saw God as a judging God. Watching us all the time and keeping a record of our good things and our bad things and that, what we did in life. But that has all changed over the years now, and we see God as a loving God. God as a loving God, caring for us at all times, looking after us at all times. And if we can build a relationship, I think it's all about a relationship with God, the same as having a relationship with another person, having a trusting relationship with God and seeing God in all things, finding God in nature, finding God in people, finding God in the things that happen to us in life, whether they be good or bad things. They're all for our good in the end, you know.
Trials and tribulations.
Trials and tribulations, yeah. And
Yeah.
I think it's all the relationship we have with God.
So, Sister Margaret, I would like to hear from you if there is not in that an implicit acknowledgement that there actually is a higher power, that there is actually a God.
Yeah. Well, for those who believe in God, it's great. For those who do not believe in God, we talk about a higher power. And the higher power can be the group. And for one person, I remember he said the higher power was the number 7 bus because it took him to his meetings. That was his higher power. But we say, let the group be your higher power and like try to do, accept what the group are telling you. And for those who believe in God, let God speak to you through the group. So there are different ways, you know. It's the God of our understanding. Whatever way people understand God, that's the way it is. Yeah.
So was it 10 years you spent directly working down in Table Lodge? Or?
12 years there, okay. Yes, yeah.
And then you moved on, but you are still involved indirectly? Indirectly,
yeah. We'll say at board level or at trustees level now at the moment. But at the moment I work with the African missions in their care unit, looking after the sick and elderly priests down there.
Okay. Why did you decide? Why did you not decide to take life easy? Why did you decide to go to the African missions after so many years of work in the Mercy and in Table Lodge?
Well, I suppose as Mercy sisters, we tend to set up a structure and then move on and leave it to lay people to carry on.
Okay.
And I felt I had other gifts to share. I still had another bit of life in me, so I said I had other gifts. I had nursing skills and I had other gifts that I could share. So for that reason, I said I'll take up the offer or the challenge, if you like, of the care unit in the African missions.
Yes.
And I'm enjoying it. I think it's great. And they're a great group to work with.
Yes, skills and competencies that you had developed as a child in Ballydaly and skills and competencies you had developed under Sister
Patsy.
And you said, I have these talents, these gifts, and I'm not going to bury them, I'm going to put them to use.
Yes.
I think that's fabulous, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. So, before we draw to a conclusion, I was just wondering, if you were back again, is there anything you would do differently?
Well, I know you asked me that question earlier, but I think I wouldn't change anything.
Yes.
I got great opportunities in the Mercy Order, opportunities I would never have had as a lay person.
Yes.
Challenges, I suppose, and what else could I say? Challenges and opportunities to travel or to, as you say, like a working place like Table Lodge, or to go to America for training. All that, it, you know, builds me up as a person too, and the faith and the trust in God, I suppose. If God, my leader used to say at the time, Sister Margaret Murphy used to say, if God wants it, will be success.
Okay.
It was terrible when I used to get it. I used to despair maybe when there were very few patients coming. She'd say, if God wants it, it will be a success.
Yes.
So I think God wanted it.
And leave it to God.
And leave it to God, yeah.
Yeah. So, 25 years in the Mercy as a nurse and some of those as a tutor, but also caring for the sick and the elderly and the helpless, all free, gratis and for nothing. Then 12 years in Table Lodge. It may be that your work in the Mercy was of greater value, but certainly to me, the setting up of Table Lodge, I think, was a hugely valuable thing for humanity, for the world, for the lives of families, and for the lives of people themselves. And it has surely contributed to making the world, within that sphere, a better place. In other words, that your life in Table Lodge and your work there made a difference for good.
Okay.
So, is there anything else you would like to add before we conclude?
I think that's...
You're happy enough?
I'm happy enough, I think, happy to conclude.
Okay. So, Sister Margaret, thank you for telling us your story. It is an interesting story of selfless giving, of service, of using all your gifts and talents in the service of others. It is a story of a life inspired by and informed by your Catholic faith. We thank you for telling it to us. We believe that it is a story that should be told, and we are grateful for the opportunity to help in telling it.
Thank you, Con.
Good, mille, Margaret.
Thank you
It's
very
been
much.
a great honour and a privilege to
Thank
talk
you.
to you.
Thank
Okay.
you.